Drip, drip, drip. Flavius opened his eyes and stared up at the same stone ceiling he had woken up to for the last 100 years. His mind drifted back to a time when he had just been sired. One where his maker had still been around. But even that now seemed more like a dream than a memory. A groan escaped him as he sat up and looked around. The wooden box with earth he was sleeping on had lost its lid 40 years ago, and he still hadn't found a replacement. Well, if others of his kind could see him, they'd laugh and laugh. But there were no other vampires here. No one but him and the prisoner, who was decidedly not of his own kind. He put a hand on the edge of the box that should have been replaced with a real coffin a century ago, and jumped out, landing on the stone floor without making a single sound. A smile appeared on his lips, but only for a moment. What would his sire say to him now? Good job? Nah, no way. The job wasn't done. It wouldn't be until either his maker returned or the prisoner finally died. Both those options seemed pretty much unlikely. Well, it would be a change at least. Flavius shook his head. That was impossible. Here, in this prison, hundreds of meters below ground, nothing ever changed. Every day he woke up at the same time, fed the rats that were both his and the prisoner's meal source, then walked up and down the halls. Some days he would have to endure the insults of the beast. Others, not a single word would be spoken. They had spent 3 months not acknowledging each other about 30 years back, and somehow parts of Flavius started to miss that time. Back then, when there had still been hope. He strode through the room, opened the door, and looked out into the hallway. What would he do if the prisoner ever escaped while he was asleep? Those first few decades, he had shut his door tightly, hoping that the beast bursting through would wake him up in time, but even that now seemed completely futile. The prisoner would never escape, and he would never die. Flavius' sire would also never return. They would spend eternity down here, only each other as hated company. Part of him had already come to terms with it decades ago, but these days it seemed more and more of his waking hours were spent thinking about the amount of time he would still need to be here. Hundreds of years? Thousands? How long would he live? It was hard to say. There were legends of his kind surviving for millennia. But those were, first, probably just stories, and second, they always talked about vampires moving around up there, where food was easy to come by and varied. Down here with the cave pigs and their blood, his body would probably give up much sooner. Or, and that was an even worse thought, his life would stretch out into eternity. He had long since lost any taste for their blood, but maybe that was one way to extend one's lifespan? It would be the mother of all cruel jokes if that turned out to be true. Flavius walked out into the hallway, rounded a corner, and found himself in front of the only cell of 26 that still held a prisoner. The man in there was hanging from a rope, his lifeless corpse dangling while his eyes stared down at him like he was some kind of pest here to annoy him. Flavius would have rolled his eyes if that weren't too much of a chore by now, turned and walked over to the wall. He had left the bear spear leaning against the last remaining mount for a torch on the wall, even though he knew the prisoner could have picked it up if he had ever escaped his cell. It had been nothing more than his own, for now, failed attempt to tempt fate. He picked up the spear, looked at its head, and gave off an almost inaudible sigh. The edge was still sharp. No reason to get the whetstone. Part of him looked forward to the day when he could finally do something with it again. Sharpening the blade, as dull as it was, would still keep him occupied for a few hours. Maybe half a day if he were extra careful. But that day was not today. Today, he would need to use it again. He turned the spear around, made the sharp edge hiss through the air, then knocked the hilt against the floor twice, mocking the behavior of those soldiers he had once known, a long, long time ago. They were all dead as well. But maybe their children still lived. Flavius wasn't sure if he really wanted an answer to that question. Even if he knew it, what would he do with that information? He couldn't go up there and take revenge right now, so all the answer would tell him was that the people he had hated once had been able to live their lives to the fullest, while he was stuck down here. With a flick of his wrist, he made the spear twirl before suddenly stopping it, the tip pointing straight at the hanging man.
"You're not getting out of this that easily,"
he growled, stepped forward, then pushed his weapon through the bars, ramming the tip in between the ribs. Hardly any blood was coming out. A clear sign that the man had hung himself yesterday, after his last round. Flavius shook his head, pulled back the tip of the spear, then raised it up and quickly cut through the braided thread holding the body in place. It fell to the floor like a sack of potatoes, and Flavius quickly pulled the weapon back completely. The corpse was lying there in this strange posture, its face on the floor while one hand was turned behind the back. Seconds passed and Flavius counted them. 15, he noted, as the first tremor ran through the dead body before a sudden groan filled the prison. With the thing choking him removed, the man was coming back to life. As he did every time Flavius cut him down. All he got from hanging himself was a few hours of death. A wicked smile played on the vampire's lips as he watched the man slowly push himself up, then shot him an angry glance.
"Still didn't stick, huh?"
Flavius asked, as if he didn't already know the answer. The man gave off another growl, rose up, then let himself fall backward. With a thud, he hit the stone floor.
"I told you 1,000,000 times already. You need silver to kill me,"
he shot back. Flavius shook his head.
"And as I told you 1,000,000 times, firstly, there's no silver here, in this prison. And secondly, I am not allowed to kill you. I have to keep you here until my sire returns."
The man didn't even look at him. He just raised his hand and pushed the long hair out of his eyes. There was no anger in his voice, only resignation.
"He's not coming back. No one is. Can't we just end it? Right here, right now?"
Flavius' lips formed into a smile for a moment.
"I am not allowed to kill you. I have to keep you here until my sire returns,"
he replied and watched those eyes glow for a moment. He could see and smell the anger rising inside the prisoner. As strange as it was to admit, messing with that guy was pretty much his only source of entertainment down here. The man on the floor sat up and glared at him.
"I will get out of here, and once I do, I will tear you to pieces, bloodsucker."
The smile vanished from his face as quickly as it had appeared.
"You've been promising that for decades, mutt. Now be a good boy. Today's a feeding day after all."
A growl reached him, but the man didn't speak again, so Flavius turned away and walked along the corridor. Sometimes he wondered if it wouldn't be a better idea to just simply let the man hang there the next time he tried it. It wasn't like his body would rot or he would manage to set himself free like that. But no. First off, his order was to keep him alive. Letting him stay dead, however long or short, was definitely against his sire's wishes. Secondly, he would rob himself of a source of entertainment down here if he didn't reanimate him. As much as he hated having to deal with the man, at least like this, he was forced to walk around the place, and it stopped him from falling into some kind of hibernation. He left the prison section behind, passed through 2 more doors, and finally ended up in the only part of the underground installation with a very slight breeze and running water. A natural cave, now closed up, but with a door. The walls here were wet, and there was this distinct odor in the air, while a tiny rivulet flowed from one side of the cave and disappeared in a hole at the other end. Flavius looked around. Even in the complete darkness, he could see and hear them. Rats. Hundreds of them scurried away as soon as he stepped into the cave. He had spent years scratching small holes into the walls for them, so they could breed more easily, and took great care to keep the moss growing well so they would find enough to eat. Every few days he took a few rats, the biggest and juiciest ones, so he could sustain himself and give the dried out carcasses to the mutt in the cell, together with some excess moss or small bones and debris the rivulet carried in. This system had kept them both alive, more or less, for over 100 years, and as long as the moss kept growing and the rats breeding, food wouldn't be a problem. Hundreds of tiny eyes were staring at him, the only predator in this place. If it were up to him, he'd make short excursions out into the world and get himself a human to keep down here, but that was out of the question. His sire's orders were absolute. Flavius jumped and landed without a sound, grabbed an older, slower rat and fed on it, then dumped the carcass into a bucket. The taste was bland. He couldn't help but notice an almost rotten tinge in the blood. The rat had been sick. Part of him wanted to spit it out again, but he knew that would be a waste. Even if he got sick, it would never kill him. As long as his neck stayed intact, no one tore out his heart, or the sun suddenly appeared down here, he would survive. His next few days might be a bit painful. He could get cramps and feel like crap. But in the end, even that would be an almost welcome change from the boredom of his life. Flavius scraped a bit of moss off the floor, then spread the wet dirt from the rivulet across the area. By tomorrow, it would look just like before. Nothing down here ever really changed. Dropping the wet moss into the bucket with the carcass, he turned and shook his head. That rotten taste was slowly wandering down his throat, and Flavius felt his stomach heating up far quicker than normal. As long as he managed to bring the food to the mutt, he could give himself 2 days to recover. No problem at all. He hung his head, picked up the bucket, and walked out of the small cave. First, it was feeding time, and then he could go back to his room. There was no reason to show himself to the prisoner if he thought he might get sick. Giving him hope was definitely not part of his sire's wishes. Flavius pushed open the door and felt his stomach lurching, gas shooting up his esophagus, then leaving his mouth. He had to stop and turn his head in disgust as he smelled it. All his senses had been enhanced since being turned, and he hadn't spent much time above ground before being taken down here. But that stench was definitely something new. It was sulfuric and wet and smelled like one of those abattoirs in the city. Flavius put out a hand to steady himself at the wall as he felt his vision go blurry. What had he eaten? No, what had been wrong with that rat? There was this heat coming from his stomach like a fever. Flavius shook his head again. That should be impossible. There wasn't really anything that could hurt a vampire like him. At least nothing his sire had told him about. Who has ever heard of a vampire getting sick from blood? That had to be a joke, right? He sank his fangs into his lower lip and felt a slight tinge of pain as he pierced his own skin. The sensation cleared his mind a bit. He exhaled another cloud of that stinking odor, then shook his head and straightened up again.
I am okay.
Flavius mumbled to no one in particular, and forced himself to look ahead again. His coffin with the soil. He would get better there. Flavius staggered, almost stumbled, then kept himself upright at the wall once more. This heat was swallowing him up. Never in the century he had been here had he ever felt anything even close to this. It was a sensation he should have left far behind. His head was swimming, his stomach lurching. He bent over to finally purge the tainted blood, but no matter how long he waited, nothing was coming out of his throat besides this sulphuric breath. Flavius cursed in his mind, reached up to straighten his hair, and felt something cold and sticky on his forehead. Sweat? He shouldn't be able to sweat. Smelling his hand, he felt a wave of nausea coming over him. His stomach cramped up and he sank to his knees. But again, nothing left his mouth.
Poison.
He mumbled, then looked around as suddenly the feeling of being watched hit him. No, there was no one there. Damn it. He forced himself back on his feet, ran, and stumbled toward the door to the prison. First, he needed to deliver the food. If he didn't do that, and the prisoner starved, he would have to go into the cell soon to force-feed him, which was something he absolutely dreaded. The old door almost broke as he stumbled through, and at the very next moment, he could hear the man in the cell jumping to his feet and grabbing the bars.
What's that stench?
The voice was ringing in his ears. Flavius stumbled forward, reached out for the wall, but missed it and hit the floor. The bucket tumbled, fell over, and spilled its contents onto the cold stone.
What is that?
Searing hot pain shot through his stomach as he experienced another cramp and looked up. Just 5 steps away, the man was standing by the bars, staring down at him with a look he hadn't seen in 100 years. There was panic in his eyes. Flavius could see the rat carcass only half a step away from his face. The dead, black eyes seemed to be laughing at him. He reached out, flicked it, and heard the squelching sound as the carcass slid over the floor and toward the cell. The man inside scrambled and jumped back, almost hitting the wall on the other side.
What did you do? It smells like death! Ugh, get this thing away from me!
The panic in the voice should have made him smile, but at the moment, Flavius couldn't even think straight. It felt like something was eating him from the inside. His whole body was trembling. It felt far too hot in here. Had fire broken out? He thought he could hear flames crackling somewhere. Maybe on himself? Or his legs burning? He looked down, but could see nothing out of the ordinary in the blurry grey mess that was the prison.
Did you drink that?
The man was sounding so far away. He could hardly follow the words.
Hey! Hey! I'm talking to you, vamp!
Flavius looked ahead and up at the man, now formless like a shadow, standing behind what seemed to be a grey curtain.
Damn, man! You need help!
He shook his head, felt another wave of pain coursing through his whole body, and groaned.
Let me out. I can help you.
Flavius groaned again, put his palms on the floor and pushed his body up, rolling over until he hit the wall. Pain started flaring up in every joint and muscle. He was shaking his head, and his vision cleared a bit. The man was standing by the door of his cell, as far away from the carcass of the rat as possible. There was real fear in his eyes.
If you die here, I could be starving in here for centuries.
Flavius pulled himself upright. His body was burning up, but he could at least push himself into a sitting position. Lying on the floor was not dignified enough.
Good.
He mumbled and could see the eyes of the prisoner starting to glow for a moment.
No, it's not good! You're dying right now! What about your orders?
Flavius felt the words before he could even comprehend them. Yes, his sire had told him to do something. Even in his jumbled-up mind, he could still feel this part of himself thrashing around against a fever and upcoming lethargy. He was dying for real. It didn't matter if it was just for a bit or if he would never wake up again. The orders of his sire were absolute. Ignoring them was unthinkable. He groaned and coughed, then suddenly felt something wet run down the corner of his mouth. His whole body shuddered. Flavius raised one hand and wiped his chin. Black streaks appeared on his deathly pale skin.
Come on, man. Let me out. I can help you.
The man in the cell was now almost screaming at him, but the voice sounded like it was coming from so far away.
Don't die on me here!
Even if he could stand up, he wouldn't let the mutt out of his cage. There was no quicker way for him to truly die than letting the Lycan out. He would tear him apart. He had promised, after all. Flavius felt a smile playing on his lips as he blinked and tried to look at the man again. The world around him turned into a single, grey, blurry mess. He would rest just for a moment. Letting his eyes fall shut, he could taste the toxic blood on his tongue again, then suddenly wanted to scream. A single sound reached his ears. It wasn't the almost howling of the man or the scurrying of rats, but a beat. One single heartbeat. He felt like his chest was bursting as the muscle that had lain dormant for over a century suddenly woke up, together with a wave of pain he could have never imagined before. Up his spine, from his tailbone to his neck, fire seemed to spread. He gave off a scream, could see the flames flickering in front of his eyes, and then collapsed to the side.
Damn it!
Darian growled, while his hands gripped the bars of the cell. The vampire had collapsed. Black blood was spilling from his mouth, nose, and eyes, and this stench was filling the air. He looked down at the dead rat, the one that smelled like pure death to him, then shook his head again.
Wake up, you piece of...
The sound and movement of one of his jailer's hands made him stop. Claws, long and sharp, were scratching over the floor, leaving deep marks in the stone.
Are you okay?
The only answer was a deep and long growl. Darian could smell it more than he could see it. No, the vamp wasn't okay at all. The stench coming off him was absolutely disgusting, but not in a rotting way. It smelled like sickness, fever, and rage. 100 years ago, when he had been free, he had come across it once before in a foxhole. One with foam in front of its mouth. Darian could see the body on the floor stop moving, and his instincts made him jump back. Almost like a blur, the vamp suddenly shot up and launched himself against the bars of the cell, the echo of the impact reverberating from the walls of the prison. Darian felt the hair on the nape of his neck stand up. The vamp was gripping the bars, then suddenly hit his head against them. A low growl, deep and angry, filled the air between them. His jailer raised his head, and for the first time, Darian got a real glimpse at the vampire's face. The pupils seemed to cover the eyes completely. Black, oozing tears were running down the cheeks, and as soon as their gazes met, his jailer bared his fangs. Not like a vampire would normally do. No. This single act was purely animalistic. There was none of the normal, arrogant dignity in his behavior. No reason or pride. This thing trying to get into his cell was an animal of pure, rage-filled instinct, not logic. Darian realized it, and yet he couldn't do anything against it. 100 years had passed since he had even seen the moon. Down here, in this deep, dark cell, he was nothing more than a human who just couldn't die quite as easily. At least, physiologically, that was. His mind was racing. Every single instinct of his screamed at him to run away, to get back to his pack. This thing right in front of him wasn't anything he wanted to face on his own. The vampire pulled back his head, growled, then hit the bars again. Black tears and spittle sprayed from the contorted face, and Darian raised his arm to protect his mouth and nose. Whatever had gotten into that arrogant prick, he really didn't want to get infected by it as well. 2 arms, long and slender, reached through the space between the bars, claws scratching the empty air, trying to get to him. His cell would hold, Darian told himself. It had withstood his own attempts for a century already. His biggest problem was what would happen if that thing out there died. He would starve over and over again, be caught in this strange form of death without ever waking up, unless someone else came down here. He swallowed hard, shook his head, and looked at the pure black eyes that were staring at him, completely enraged.
Oh, I hate you. You know that.
The 2 arms pulled back, and instead of scratching at the air, they grabbed the bars.
I tried that one a few times already.
He mocked, then felt his mouth suddenly go dry. Those 2 pale hands were gripping the iron hard enough to make the metal groan. He could see the vampire biting his lower lip, drawing dark, stinking blood that dripped down his chin and onto his shirt. The rage-filled growl that came out of the thing made Darian's body move back on instinct again. He could hear stone crumbling at the base of the bars, then the metal groaning as it chafed against its foundation.
Oh no.
Darian whispered and watched as the rabid vampire started to bend and break the bars of his cell. He looked around in a panic. There was nothing in here he could use as a weapon. His mind was going haywire. He felt his own fingers scratching the stone in his back to see if he could escape that way. Like an animal caught in a trap, he remembered the vampire's words so many decades ago. Darian cursed his mind and heard the loudest groan of the metal yet. Slowly but surely, the bars were bending as the rabid beast pushed and pulled at them, scratched the metal and bared his teeth in a rage so deep it had swallowed him whole.
What do I do? What do I do?
Darian heard the panic in his own voice as one of the bars started wobbling, then bent inward, creating the first gap in his cell in over 100 years. The vampire stuck his head inside, and his black eyes seemed to glow in anticipation. He couldn't let this thing slip into his cell like that. There would be no way for him to escape. Darian pushed himself off the wall as quickly as he could. He jumped forward before the vampire had even a chance to react, clenched his jaw, and rammed his shoulder right against the beast's head, hitting the rabid monster with all he could muster. The thud as his jailer's head hit the bent bar was almost deafening, followed by a growl just as loud. A sudden jolt raced through Darian. He jumped back and could see the fangs of the monster snapping shut only a hair's breadth away from the skin of his arm. His relief didn't last long, though. The figure in front of him almost blurred as the beast swiped at him with its arm, hitting him in the side. It felt like being kicked by a horse. The force alone lifted him off his feet. Darian felt 2 ribs breaking in his chest as the simple swipe flung him away like a ragdoll, sending him sprawling as the beast roared in anger. He got up the next moment, holding his wounded side, and saw the rabid vampire pull back, then jump forward again, rushing at the bars. With an ear-splitting thud, 2 of them finally gave way, broke free from the stone foundation, and clattered over the floor as the vampire stumbled and fell into the cell. Darian didn't miss his chance. He leapt over the sprawled vampire, ready to run, but suddenly felt something grabbing his ankle. sending him to the floor as well. The moment he glanced back and saw the eyes staring at him, his blood seemed to freeze. They were filled with rage and greed. A mouth opened, fangs were bared, and he felt himself being pulled back, his leg getting closer and closer to the sharp teeth ready to sink into his flesh. Darian howled in fright and pain, and for a single moment he could see the lips of the monster quivering as they formed a smile around the open mouth. He kicked at the vampire, aiming for the fangs to try to break them. The moment his soul connected, he realized the futility of it all. It was like he was kicking at the metal bars of his cell. The thing showed almost no reaction. Darian smelled the sour breath, felt himself getting pulled back again, and screamed in terror. One more time he kicked and felt the skin on his foot getting cut by the sharp teeth. Blood sprayed out of the wound, and suddenly the grip around his other leg disappeared, and he saw the vampire lick the red drops from his face. Darian pulled his feet back, jumped up and started to run, sure the thing would be on him in another second. But even as he ran out of the hole in the bars, nothing followed. He glanced back one last time. The vampire was still on his hands and knees, now licking the blood from the stone like a beast. This was his chance, he told himself. Not to get out, no. He had no idea what the exit was, or if it even still existed, but he needed to take care of the monster here and now. The bear spear was still leaning against the wall, out of reach from behind the bars. He grabbed it, turned back to the cell, and could see the monster savoring the bloody drops that had spilled on the floor. His former jailer didn't even look up as he came back, the weapon raised high. With a deep growl, Darian stepped into the cell and stood next to him.
I told you, didn't I? You disgust me.
He felt the anger welling up inside his mind as he took aim and brought down the tip of the spear, aiming right at the back of the monster. The sound of the weapon piercing the flesh next to the spine, cutting through the heart and coming out between the ribs, filled the air with a grave finality. Darian let out another growl as he watched the figure at his feet shudder, then tumble over. He threw his head back and let out a long and angry howl, then looked down again at the fallen foe before his feet. Without a second thought, he kicked the body and heard the thud reverberating back from the walls. Blood was still spraying from the wound on his foot.
Strange.
Darian mumbled, then felt this anger rising inside him and kicked the corpse again. A wound like that should have closed up by now. With a soft thud, the body rolled to its side, and he could see his own footprint on the shirt. The bloody stain was red and black. Darian stumbled backwards and gripped the bar. He hadn't noticed it before, but now his leg felt like it was on fire. Hot tendrils spread through his veins, reaching up toward his spine. He needed to do something. Darian tried to take a step, but his dizziness brought him to his knees. It wasn't from the wound or the stress and fear. He could feel it. His legs started cramping up, and as he looked over at the dead body, he felt this rage building again inside him. The infection was spreading. He howled and felt his nails scraping against the stone floor. No, whatever was in his bloodstream was already turning him. Darian growled and heard his own animalistic voice coming back to him from the walls. It sounded like a rabid pack of wolves. He couldn't get out of here like this. If there was any one of his brethren still up there, he would attack him without reason. He had to die here, now. Darian opened his mouth and put out his tongue. Would that be enough? He wasn't sure, but he had to try. The muscles in his jaw suddenly grew stiff as a high-pitched, wailing sound came from his throat. The pain was flooding his whole body, turning his vision red. He coughed, watching black droplets spray the floor and hitting the run-through corpse in front of him. If he got out. If. A hand moved over the stone, grabbed hold of the tip of the bear spear, and snapped it off without a second's hesitation. The vampire was coming alive again. Impossible! Part of his mind warned through the red haze, slowly filling his thoughts. He had killed enough of them to know. But this one was different. Sturdy. Darian howled and felt two eyes looking at him with the same rage that was now inside of him. The vampire pulled the wooden shaft out of his back and got to his feet. Darian screamed as the last vestige of himself was swallowed by the red haze, and he raced forward to tear his enemy apart.